Hello again, everybody. Welcome to a new screencast lecture. We got a good one tonight. This is called Ecological Organization. Let's get started. Okay, we like to start with some new vocabulary, so let's go ahead and we're going to start with the word organism. Well, let's define the word organism. It means an independent living thing. Some examples of organisms would include an eagle, an elk, a tree, like an oak tree. Those would all be considered organisms. Our next vocabulary term would be population. This sounds like a word you probably know, but it's used a little bit differently with a biologist. Our definition for population is all individual members of the same species in an area. Some examples of populations could include a whole bunch of eagles, a whole bunch of moose, and a whole bunch of lilies. Now be careful with this term. Please don't confuse the word population with population size. A population is defined as all individual members of a species in an area. It's not going to be a number. A population size would be a number. And it's easy to make this confusion because we often say things like the population of New York City is 8 million people. As we recall from last lecture, the different groups of people will use the same words, but they use them in different ways. Sometimes they use what's called different jargon. The same words may have different meanings to different groups of people. The exact same words, like population and population. Our next vocabulary term is community. Again, a term you may be familiar with, but we're going to use it a little differently here. A community is the populations of multiple species in an area. We use the word community often, like we'll say your neighborhood community or doing community service. In this case, an ecologist or a biologist is going to use the term community, populations of multiple species in an area. Some examples of community could be all of the eagles in an area, all of the lilies in an area, all of the moose in an area. Mooses. Now here's a clip we're going to check out, and while you're watching this clip, you should identify 3 populations of antlered animals that are identified by name. Here's a clip. Let's get started.
The elk is a traveler. Over time, they have settled in many habitats and can survive a wide variety of conditions, just like your average Canadian. They made their way to Canada over a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska that was exposed by the glaciers over 120,000 years ago. As the Earth warmed up and the glaciers melted, the elk was forced to migrate to a more suitable habitat, and today they can live almost anywhere where food is available. At the turn of the century, the elk population was down from 10 million to 90,000 due to overhunting and land clearing. Today, there are 1 million elk in North America, but loss of habitat still threatens their existence. Elk aren't shy when there's something on their mind. Their use of vocal communication sets them apart from other members of their species, such as the sweetly silent white-tailed deer. Also a little more reserved with their emotions is the moose, another antlered animal. Don't be fooled, though. Moose need a great deal of space and can become very aggressive when under stress, such as traffic or loud noise.
Okay, what a nice little clip there about elk and deer in the Canadian tundra. Now, what 3 animal populations were identified in the previous video? Hopefully you came up with elk, white-tailed deer, and of course the moose that was featured right at the end. Now these 3 populations, are they all part of the Canadian tundra community? Well, yes they are. Now remember, a community is all the populations in a given ecosystem, and elk, moose, white-tailed deer, they're populations in the tundra ecosystem, therefore they would be part of the community for the Canadian tundra. Now think back to the video we just saw and identify 3 other populations that were seen in the video. Here's a hint, they were not named, like the antler species were. One of them could have been grasses, another was trees, and a third, you might have said something like shrubs. And are grasses, trees, and shrubs, are they part of the Canadian tundra community? Well, yes, they are. Again, a community includes all the living things in an ecosystem. Grasses, trees, shrubs, they're all living things. They're all populations in that community of the Canadian tundra ecosystem. Now, again, think back to that video. What were 4 other things that were seen in the video, or maybe even unseen in the video? And here's a hint for you. They were not named, and there's a whole bunch of them. One of them you might have come up with would be rocks. Another could be dirt. Another could be light. Another could be water. You also could have come up with, say, thermal energy, the temperature, the heat, and maybe even said air. You know, there's a whole bunch of others that you could have come up with, but there's 6 there that you could have. I only asked you for 4, but again, many, many more. Now let's think about this. Are rocks, dirt, light, water, thermal energy, air, are they part of the Canadian tundra community? This one might have caught you. No, they're not. Rocks, dirt, light, water, thermal energy, and air are not part of the Canadian tundra community. You might be saying, well, they're there. I mean, we see them right there in the picture. Here's the thing. Community is all living things in an area. Rocks, dirt, etc., they are not considered to be living things, therefore would not be part of the community. Now, for our final vocabulary term for this screencast lecture, it's habitat. This one you probably have heard before. However, we're going to give it a little extra information to it. First of all, the habitat is the place where the organism lives. That's probably one that you knew. However, this additional part, you probably weren't as familiar with. The habitat must provide all things that the organism needs to survive, unless it is not a good habitat. And what are some of those things that an organism needs from its habitat so that it can survive? Well, one of the things it needs to provide energy. Some people would say it needs to provide food, not necessarily called food, but it needs to provide energy. It needs to provide an appropriate climate, not too hot, not too cold, not too dry, not too wet, etc., etc. It needs to provide enough space for that organism. It needs to provide some sort of shelter or living space. It must provide water. All living things, as far as we know, require water. And it must provide air of some sort. Here's a clip. Let's check it out. It's a good one.
Animals and plants live in many different places all over the world. But why is it that some animals live in warm places and some in cold? Why can some plants survive with very little water and some can only live in water? We'll answer those questions and more. But first, it's important to know that the place where a plant or animal lives is called a habitat. Every habitat is very different. However, the habitats meet the needs of the plants and animals that live there. All living things need air, water, food, and space too. Within the space of a habitat, animals need to find shelter. A shelter is a place or object that protects animals from weather and predators. This tiny salamander finds shelter among the rocks. A bear may use a cave as a shelter, while other animals may climb trees for safety or go underwater to protect themselves. Some animals may find shelter by digging tunnels or burrows under the ground, and some animals carry their shelter around with them.
Okay, I told you that was a good one. And now it's time to play what vocabulary term you've learned in this section would best describe. Well, that's a terrible title for a game show, isn't it? Well, so what vocabulary term would best describe what you see here? Now, this is an organism. Why is it the organism? Well, it's an organism because this is just one individual of one species of tree. Just one. What about this one? What do you guys think about this? Well, this is a population. This is a population because it is all of the members of a single species located in an area. So a whole bunch of oak trees in this case. Now, how about this? We've added a few things. This is a community. Why is this a community? Well, it's a community because there's multiple populations in the area. So you see populations of flowers, populations of coniferous trees, population of deciduous trees, etc., etc. We added a few new organisms here. Let's take a look. What do you think now? This is now... maybe tricked you. This is still community. Why is it still community? Well, it's still community because multiple populations in an area. These are all living things. We just added more living things. So we added eagle, blue jay, moose, rabbit. Might be a couple other things hidden in here. Now we added a few more things to this picture. What do you think now? Well, this time we're looking at an ecosystem. The reason why it's an ecosystem is that this is all of the living and non-living things in an area. You see rocks are added, sunlight, air. These are all non-living. Okay, let's check out another video clip. Here we go.
In describing an ecosystem, ecologists use several terms. They refer to the group of living organisms in an ecosystem as a community. For example, in a forest ecosystem, trees, animals, birds, and insects make up a community. And in a community, the same type of living thing makes up a population. For instance, all the squirrels in a forest make up a population of squirrels. Every member of a community needs a place to live, where it can get food and shelter. Ecologists call this place a habitat. In the forest, many birds live and nest in the branches of a tree. The branches are their habitat. In a habitat, every organism pursues a way of life which is called a niche. An organism's niche includes how much water it needs, what it eats, where it lives, when and how it reproduces, and other such factors that make up its life. A beaver, for example, will build a dam across a stream in a forest. The beaver's dam helps fulfill the requirements of its niche. The construction and completion of the dam affects the entire ecosystem. So the ecosystem is the basic unit of ecology. An ecosystem includes living things and their surroundings. There are many kinds of ecosystems. An ecosystem can be as small as this magnified drop of pond water, or as large as an ocean. Living things in an ecosystem are a community, while the same type of organism makes up a population that lives in a habitat and has a niche, that is, a way of life that the species pursues within the habitat.
Well, that's a real nice summary video clip there for you. Hope you liked it. And that's all we have for today. So hope you learned a lot. Hopefully you got your notes taken care of, and we'll catch you next time. See ya.